This afternoon, I just want to share with the young people my testimony of when I was drafted into the Marine Corps back in 1966. I got this letter from the draft board and it said greetings, and I well knew what that meant. I and my wife had been married exactly 6 months to the day from the time we was married on July 25 until I was inducted into the Marine Corps on January 25. And it was pretty hard when I got that letter. In fact, I'll be honest with you, I cried, but because I knew.
I bet she did too.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, she was my support. She said, "It's all right, Keith. You'll come home. You'll come home." But we normally, as a conscientious objector of Seventh-day Adventists, they always put us in the Army, and they make medics out of us. And I knew of other people that had been there. In fact, I knew the story of Desmond Doss and the film, the movie that's been made now about Hacksaw Ridge. And all those things had made real impressions on me as a boy growing up. And so when that day came, when I had to go up to the draft board and go to Seattle to get my physical, why, I remember on that Monday morning, as I and my wife went into Goldendale, Washington, and as we stopped at the stoplight and turned, we had 2 or 3 blocks to go down to the bus depot. And I laid my hand over on Michelle's knee and I said, "Michelle, I don't know where I'm going to be come Friday night, but one thing you can be assured, I won't be working." And I had no idea what was going to happen. But that tells me that my mind was made up then. So anyway, we went, got on the bus, went to Seattle, and there was about 90 of us went in for draft that day. By the time we got there, it was like on Tuesday, yeah. And so we had our physical, and then come Wednesday, why, we was all in this room, and the first sergeant got up, an Army first sergeant got up and said, "We don't have our quota for the Marine Corps this month. Does anybody want to join?" I'd already learned from my brother-in-laws and my dad and my older brothers that had been in the service, you don't join for nothing. You don't volunteer for anything. So I didn't say nothing, but one fella did. He raised his hand, and the sergeant said, "Well, we don't have enough," so we just went down the list. Every third name, they called them up. They didn't have enough, so went down the list again. My name got called up, and so that's how easy it was to get in the Marine Corps.
Didn't even have to have a test or anything, huh?
Nothing. And yeah, they asked us if we wanted, but we didn't want to join, so they joined us. So all them that's going to be in the Marine Corps, go over here in this little room. Raise your right hand. That old first sergeant read off all our things and swore us in. We was in the Marine Corps. And I went up right away then. I went up to him and I said, "Sir, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, a conscientious objector. What are they going to do with me down in San Diego?" And he just shrugged his shoulders and said, "I don't know. Ask them when you get down there." And so we flew out of there that Wednesday evening, landed in San Diego, and went through got our first military haircut, and that was an experience. And anyway, by Friday morning, why, my drill instructor had time to go over our records, and he saw that he had one conscientious objector. Now I have to back up a little bit, because when we was in Seattle, and after I had went up and talked to the sergeant about, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist and a conscientious objector, there was another fellow standing there that was put in the Marine Corps the same way. A little later on, while we was at the restroom, and he came up to me and he said, "So, you're a Seventh-day Adventist?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I am too, supposedly." He said, "I've been going to Auburn Academy, one of our academies there," and he said, "But I've dropped out." And he said, "I smoke and I drink." And he said, "Are you going to stand up?" And I said, "Yes, I'm going to stand up." And he said, "Well, I'm not." I didn't think no more of it then. His name was Poley. So when we're down there, then that Friday morning, when my drill instructor saw that he had one conscientious objector in there, he ran us all in this one Quonset, and he said, he walked in there, and I'll never forget the look on his face, and he says, and he was looking around at everybody, and he says, "I got one conscientious objector in here, and I want to know who it is." With that introduction, I walked forward. I knew who he was talking about. I walked forward, and he said, "What religion are you?" And I said, "Sir." I'd already learned that the first word out of your mouth is "sir," and the last word out of your mouth is "sir." "Sir, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, sir." And he looks around and he says, "Is there any more of you in here?" Two fellas came forward, Poley and this other young fella from Salt Lake. And he turned to them and he said, "Will you take a rifle?" And they said, "Yes." And he turned back to me and he said, "They'll take a rifle. Why won't you?" Now remember, there's a text that says, don't worry about what you're going to say when you're brought up before the judges or whatever. And so when he asked me that, I'd never dreamed of ever having, but the answer came just like that. "Sir, I can't answer for them. I can only answer for me." And with that, that was, And from then on, he said, "You're a slimy puke." From then on, when he wanted me, he just hollered, "Where's my puke?" And that was my nickname. "Where's my puke?" And so, we went on through that day, and then it come Friday afternoon, Friday evening. We went in to eat chow. Now, we was in San Diego, so it's, further south. Sun goes down at a different time than it did at home. But we went in and ate chow, supper, and we came back out, and we was out on the drill field learning how to march. And I can remember, I could see that old sun sinking in the west, and it was just going down. This was in January, last of January. And we was out there drilling. Finally, I knew that sun was just right down there, just dropping over the horizon. And I hollered out, I said, "Sir, Private Browning requests permission to speak to the platoon commander, sir." He didn't say a word, just kept on marching. I called out again the second time, and he didn't say a word. Inside, it was just like something was going to just blow up, break in there. I finally just stopped, and the rest of the platoon marched off, just kept right on marching. And he looks back there and he said, "Browning, fall in." I just stood there. And so he turned the platoon over to the other drill instructor, and he said, "I'll go back there, I'll take care of him, I'll just lock him up." So he said, "Follow me." And so I did. Well, we went to see the captain, and the captain came out and talked to me and tried to reason with me. They call it reason. And all I could do was share with him, "Look, sir, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. I can't go against my religious conviction." And I learned And see, I'd never thought of saying that, but I learned that when you put it on a religious conviction, we live in America and we have religious rights. And I'd never thought of that, but that's just the way the words came out. There it is again. He'll make sure that you say the right words. And it was so wonderful. And so anyway, that evening, they had to fill out all this paperwork and everything. And so here it was, it was past 9:30 by the time they got everything ready. And he took me over to the brig, and I got, what do you say, signed in. And it was all new. I'd never been down that road before.
Didn't throw you in jail when you were in high school or anything?
Nothing. And so they took me back down the hall and down this hall, and here's these little cells that's solid metal walls on each side, cement floor, one bunk in there, and they weren't, I'm going to say, they weren't hardly 8 by 8 square, 8 feet by 8 feet square, and it had a mesh thing over the top. There's my bunk, and I just went in there. They slid that door shut, and you hear it go clink, and it locked. Now, it wasn't a solid door. It was a mesh screen, heavy. And so there I am in that little room. And I look around, and wasn't nothing to look at, but I was still trying to, in my mind, sort out, wow, how did I get, what's going on? And just within a little bit, lights go out at 10 o'clock. Well, by then, the lights went out. It was the neatest thing. There I was, locked in this room. Nobody around to harass you or nothing. And I could kneel beside my bunk. Now, I'm a boy that learned to pray. I had a mother that always knelt beside her bed before she went to bed at night. First thing in the morning when she got up, she knelt beside her bed. And so I'd always learned to pray, always said my prayers in the evening and in the morning. But when for the last 2 or 3 days, I didn't have that privilege.
Yeah.
And it was so neat. I could kneel down there by that bunk, and it was kind of cool in there. There was just one little old blanket on that bed, but I knelt down there, and I could just pour my heart out to Jesus and tell him about, he knew where I was, but what is going on? What is happening? Because let me tell you, that was a shock to be in boot camp. And so anyway, I just remember kneeling there, and it was so good. I could just pour my heart out, and it just felt warm. It was so warm in that room. It was so neat. And I think of that often, how comforting it was, just so relaxing, and so you felt good in there.
Yeah.
But anyway, about 5 o'clock in the morning, the lights came on, and the doors unlocked, and we go back out, and we have to do exercises, and we go and have breakfast, and then by, I don't know what time it was for sure, but anyway, here one of my drill instructors came, picked me up from the brig, and he took me right down to where, as Seventh-day Adventists, we take care of our boys in the military. There was a civilian chaplain at the chaplain's office, and I learned his name was Hollis Anderson, but he came every Sabbath morning, and he was there for about an hour. Wow. Because there was getting to be more Adventist guys drafted into the Marine Corps then, because Vietnam was really going, and the draft was really up. So anyway, it was like an angel. I can remember when I saw him. Oh man, it was so wonderful. There was a smiling face, and Yeah, it wasn't that way. Oh, it wasn't that way. But anyway, so that was my first Sabbath. I mean, we was only there for an hour. Then I had to go back to my barracks, back to the Quonset where I was. And I remember I used to spend my Sabbaths out there on the runner's bench in front of my company office. And that's where I'd spend all day Sabbath. At lunchtime, I'd go and eat lunch, come back, and I'd sit there until sundown Sabbath night. But I think of all the things that happened then, and the different experiences that I went through. It takes too long to tell them now, but over the course of about 2 months while you're in boot camp, by the time half of that was over, my drill instructor had begun to realize, because at different times when they was at rifle classes, I would go back to he'd take me back to the office, and I would, what they call his house mouse, and do little jobs around the office for him. And so he would ask me different questions, you know, and it was beginning to get better. He realized that I wasn't doing this to try to get out of things. It was my religious conviction. And he was realizing that. And so before it was done, his attitude and everything had totally changed. And so then I remember the night when we were all done. We had graduated from boot camp, and he was reading our MOS. That's going to be the job that you're each one going to do. My MOS came down a grunt. Well, that's a rifleman in the Marine Corps. And he just read and when he came to my name, he said, Browning, a grunt. And he just looked at me and just went on to the next one. Didn't say nothing else. The next morning, before everybody got on the buses and was going to go to ITR, he read off our MOSs again to us. And when he came to my name, he said, Browning, a grunt. Browning, you're not going to ITR. I've already put in for new orders for you, so you're going to go to casual and wait for new orders. Because he said, I knew if you went to ITR, you would mess up their whole program. and so it tells me, yeah, before it was done, he was sticking up for me. He knew that wasn't going to work. And so while I was at casual, I would go and run errands for the company office and everything. And so one day I was in there, and a staff sergeant called me over to his desk, and he said, Browning, he said, what in the world am I going to do with you? And I said, sir, I don't know. I said, I know my brother was in the Army during Korea, and they made a cook out of him. And he was a cook. And he said, all right. He said, do you know I just might be your guardian angel? And that was the end of our conversation. It wasn't 3 days later, and I got my new MOS, a cook. But anyway, as I would run errands for him there, before I left, I was going out across the parade deck, and here I met my old platoon commander. He had a new bunch of recruits, and you know, they were brand new. He must have just picked them up, because they were in tennis shoes, yellow sweatshirts that said Marine Corps on the back, and learning how to march. They were hooked arm to arm like this, and it was the way we started too. But anyway, he said, he recognized me. He said, Browning. And he turned his new platoon over to the other platoon commander. He came over there where I was, and he said, Browning, he said, see my new recruits? And I said, oh yeah, they look wonderful. And so we stood there and talked a little bit. And he wanted to know how things were going and, everything. And as we turned and started leaving, he was walking away this way and I was going the other direction. And he turned back and he said, the last words I ever heard from old Staff Sergeant Bowser, "Browning, just stand up. Stand up for what you believe. You'll come out all right."
Amen.
There was the guy that locked me up, and now he's telling me to stand up.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget those words. They ring back here in the back of my mind. I'll never forget that. So anyway, I never saw him anymore. But my MOS, I left from boot camp. They flew me straight home for 2 weeks because my MOS said Westpac Ground Forces. I wasn't going to cook school. I wasn't going anywhere. I was going to come back in 2 weeks, go to staging, and they was sending me overseas. When I got back down to staging.
What is staging?
Oh, that was the place that you go and they go through all your paperwork, and then you either get on a ship or a plane and head for Vietnam. I mean, that's where we were headed.
Yeah.
So there was a question on the papers that we filled out. There was one little box that said, "Is there any reason why you think that you shouldn't go to Vietnam?" Now, why? And I checked that box, not knowing why or what, but I checked that box. Next day, Lieutenant called me into his office. And he said, "Browning," he said, "I see where you checked this one little box." He said, "So what's the reason why you think you know?" And I said, "Sir, I'm a conscientious objector." And he said, "Oh, really?" And he looks back on my record, and it's on my record.
Yeah.
And he said, "Let me do a little checking. I'll call you tomorrow." And so he dismissed me. I left. Then he called me back in there the next day, and he said, "Browning, I've been doing some checking. There's an ordinance in the Marine Corps orders. The Marine Corps cannot send a conscientious objector into a combat zone." So he says, we'll just find a place for you here on this base. You'll serve your time out right here, and that's it. And I said, "Okay." So it took them quite a while before I thought they was never going to find me a place. I think I was there for 3 weeks or so. Before and anyway.
What'd you do for 3 weeks?
You just sit around.
Sit around doing nothing.
Terrible, yeah. You sweep the barracks, the room where all these guys were, waiting to be dispersed to wherever they was going. The days went slow.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, they found me a job in the mess hall. And it was in the mess hall right where we go and eat all the time. Excuse me, I got to use my... So I went and checked in up there, and I don't know how much should I share more than what we did at.
Whatever you want to share.
But anyway, I checked in and I was working at that mess hall. And I remember one day I was serving chow, and in that mess hall, it's where everybody comes through that mess hall, either goes to staging or wherever, and then, so it's like a transit, coming in and out all the time. So every now and then I would see some of the fellas that I went through boot camp with. And one day, I was there was a couple guys sitting over at this table, and they said, "Browning, come over here." And I recognized them. "Oh, that's a couple kids that we was in boot camp together." And they said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh man, I've been here for 3 months or something, and so we was talking, and, "Well, have you heard about this guy, or have you seen where this one is?" And anyway, they said, You remember Poley? And I said, yeah. Remember he was put in a tank battalion? Yeah, I remember. His MOS was he was tank battalion. Well, Poley was over in Vietnam, walking beside a tank, stepped on a mine. Poley's coming home. He's paralyzed from his neck down. He's on his way home. And I thought, really, Poley? You said you wasn't going to stand up. You're coming home, and you're not standing up. And as I think about that, I have to keep asking myself, was it worth it? Was it worth it? All the harassment, all the things they called you and everything that they did there in boot camp, was it worth it? Yeah, it was worth it.
Yeah.
It was worth it. That was 50-some years ago. I don't know whatever happened to Poley, but let me tell you, serving the Lord, standing up for what he asks, is worth it.
Yeah.
He remembers the promises that he's given. And all I can say is, I'm here today. And I want to share that with the young people, because stand up. You'll never be wrong. You'll get some harassment, but you'll be glad you did.
Yeah, it's hard sometimes. But
Oh.
it's always worth it.
Yes.
It is.
Yeah, the payback is, yeah. And so I just, if some young people can learn from my little experience there, that will be worth it.
Amen.
To hear other young people
Amen.
stand up.
Thank you, Keith, for your testimony. We appreciate it.
Thank you. You're more than welcome. The